Welcome to the first edition of the DTIBR talks. My name is Bruno Vieira. I'm the academic director at DTIBR, the Law, Technology and Innovation Research Center. The DTIBR is a non-profit association that works to bridge academia and private business. It aims to be the center of excellence in training, develop innovative products and services, and foster interest in the latest development in the area of law and technology. The DTIBR Talks is a forum for debating a myriad of topics that intertwine law and technology. For our very first edition, I have the pleasure to give the floor to Dr. Thibault Schrepel. Dr. Schrepel is an associate professor of law at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, where he co-directs the Amsterdam Law and Technology Institute. He is also a faculty affiliate at Stanford University Codex Center, where he has created the Computational Antitrust project that brings together over 55 antitrust agencies and 35 scholars. He also holds research and teaching positions at the University Paris 1, Panthéon-Sorbonne, and Sciences Po Paris. In addition, he is a Harvard University Beckerman Center alumnus, a member of the French Superior Audiovisual Council Scientific Board, and an expert appointed to the World Economic Forum. So, without any further delay, please welcome our guest speaker, Thibault Schrepel.
Thank you very much. As we were just discussing, it's a real pleasure to be discussing the subject with you. We've been in touch for quite some time, including to work together on blockchain issues, but this is not the subject of what I will be discussing today. Although maybe here and there I will be mentioning blockchain because I can't help myself but to talk about it. The idea for today's presentation is to explore what computational antitrust is and what it could be. And this requires that we explore what is possible from a technical perspective, what is possible according to the legal systems and the rules and the standards such as they exist or such as they should be, but also to understand the limits of what will potentially never be possible, or at least never in the coming 100 years, let's say. So this is a bit of the program. What I want to do is to start by exploring, indeed, what is computational antitrust. And then I'll be asking you a question, and I guess that your vote will actually change the course of my presentation. And so depending on whether you think that computational antitrust is or is not a good idea, I'll be then changing the course of the presentation, exploring this path over here or this one over here. But this requires first that I address what is computational antitrust. And so without further ado, I will dive into the matter, but I want first to ask you my question before I actually try to nudge you in a certain direction. And so my question is the following. Should we fight fire with fire, which here means that we could think about pushing antitrust agencies to use AI or blockchain or quantum computing? And so for you to answer the question, and if you are watching this video in a few years or months, to be more realistic, I'm pleased to say that the outcome of the vote have been recorded already. So thank you very much for watching us. But this is now the time for you, Bruno, to tell me what you think about it. And so you do have several options. You could take a picture of the QR code. You could otherwise go to slido.com and enter the hashtag DTIBR and answer the question. And so while you do that, I will be exploring what is computational antitrust. And so here I've put two giants, and actually if I wanted to be more accurate, I should probably look a bit like this, which is very small compared to those two gentlemen here. The first one is Leibniz, a German philosopher who wrote a book during the 17th century in which he was actually arguing that with the right tools, you could actually calculate outcomes even though they may be social in nature. And so this is a bit of the dream of what is computational law, the idea that you could indeed calculate legal outcomes and design legal rules by using the right tools. And if you transpose that to the space of antitrust or computational law, depending on where you are located, you see that a reason why we may want to have computational law applied to the field of antitrust is for the following reason, as described by Richard Posner. There is a mismatch between the time for markets and the time for the law. And this is something that you've heard of, I'm sure, even in law school, you will hear professors complaining about that and explaining that we are too far behind and that therefore it's potentially either the end of the world or a good reason why we should try to design institution in a way to prevent people from doing illegal activities and engaging in illegal behaviors. And so this indeed, I believe, is a risk, especially when it comes to the modern economy. And if I want to give you some numbers to try to scare you away from antitrust, I will be actually giving you the following numbers. First, as it stands, we detect very few of the infringements to competition law. So this is, of course, unfortunate. And to some degree, you could argue that we should do better. But the problem is that agencies have very scarce resources. And so it is really hard for them indeed to detect more than just a few of the infringements to antitrust. And as a result, according to the OECD, what's happening right now as we speak is that 80% of the time, when there is a case before the European Commission, it is actually coming from a reactive method, mainly waiting for one competitor to complain or one of the colluders to apply for leniency, which of course is less likely to appear when it comes to abuses of dominance because there is just one company engaged in the matter. And in the United States, it amounts to 90%. And so this, I believe, is problematic, especially if considering that using technology, it could be algorithms and it could be blockchain and smart contract, you can actually set up better anti-competitive practices with less deviations and less disagreement and discontent as to the practice, meaning that you will see less and less of such leniency applications and complaints. And already, if you look at the numbers, and antitrust agencies are trying to avoid the subject, but we have, again, report coming from the OECD and the ICN and other international bodies showing that the amount of leniency applications is already declining for the last 10 years. And I believe this is about to become even worse because of those technology. So faced with this background, I think we have no issue but to actually use computational tools, especially if you consider the following numbers that appears on the screen right now. Last year, we produced 44 zettabytes of data, which amounts to 40 times more bytes than there are stars in the universe. And as you can see, in just 15 years from now, we will be producing over 2,000 zettabytes of data, which means that if you do not have the right tool, then it will become nearly impossible to detect in a proactive way those anti-competitive behaviors. But as I said, the reactive method is also declining. So then we have an issue if neither the reactive or the proactive way of detecting practices is efficient. And so this is issue number one. Issue number two is the following. Even if you may detect a potential practice, then you have an issue when it comes to analyzing the data that you have. And by the way, the same is true for the companies. It might be that it is really hard for the top management to actually understand all the practices that is going on within the company, to analyze the behavior of all the agents, to understand all of the practices. To be concrete, the CMA, which is the UK competition agency, got access to Google and Bing search queries for just 1 week. And they ended up with between 3 and 4 billion data entries. So here it is, again, in my opinion, a call to use computational tools. And more than that, I think we have an issue when it comes to understanding the nature of what's happening on the markets. Computational as it stands is very static. We take pictures about the market shares, we take picture about a practice, we take picture about an industry or a certain technology. But when it comes to understanding the evolution of what's happening, we have no clue of how to do it. And I understand why, if you are working for a competition agency, you may want to, rely on those static way of approaching competition law, because at least you can operationalize those ways. You know how to define the market shares, you know how to define, a practice according to the legal rules and standards. But I think we can do better than that, especially if you consider that computational tools could be helpful when it comes to understanding the movie of markets and the evolutionary nature of markets evolution, and also tech evolution and industry evolutions. So those are the reasons why I think computational tools are to be welcomed in the space. But some people seems to think that we do have another option, which would be to give up. And here, what you could say is that we relied on emergent order, or to put it differently, the market will take care of it, which is true. The market indeed will potentially take care of it, whatever it is, but it may take 50 years. And so the question is, do we want to wait 50 years when we could actually be proactive and do something and fix the issue? Or you could say, well, we're going to try to rely on ex ante regulation, which is the approach taken by part of the agents working for the European Commission, part of the agents working for US Congress and antitrust agencies, and in the UK and other agencies. But even there, once you have enforced the Digital Markets Act, you do have a question when it comes to detecting infringement to the DMA and analyzing the practices listed in the DMA. And so I believe that for that reason, we really have no choice but not to give up when it comes to understanding what's happening. And for that, I think we have no choice but to rely on computational antitrust, which is the actual meeting between computational law, which you could define as using computer-based problem-solving methods in the legal space, and competition law on the other end. And so, of course, I'm in favor of that, as you may suspect. And if I want to go a step further, what I would say is that it requires not only to understand what are the tools that we can use, and this is what I want to discuss with you, and to show you how already we can use NLP and topic modeling and blockchain and all the techniques to improve and augment competition law. But it could also be that we're going to have eventually to discuss the actual substance of competition law. So with that in mind, it is now time for me to actually explore the results of the votes. And I just want to show you those results. Otherwise, you won't believe me. And so I am pleased to report that 100% of you seem to think that using computational tools in the space of competition law is indeed a good idea. So with that in mind, I will then indeed explore the path over here and try to see how we could do that if indeed we think that computational tools could be helpful in the space. So first of all, thank you very much for making me very happy. It would have been quite awkward for you to vote for the opposite, I guess, but I'm also aware of two potential biases. First, we tend to answer yes to survey. That's how our human brain function. And we also tend to try to please the person asking us the question. And you know that I've been working on computational antitrust, so it might be that you think that it is actually not a good idea. So with that in mind, I will try to convince you to the best that I can while addressing the issues. And I think this might be actually a even better way of convincing you that it might be something we want to explore. But the question will soon become, if antitrust without computer science is like Sherlock without Watson, the question is then, which Watsons do we need? And here, I think we have to be very concrete, especially if we want to convince competition agencies to use those tools, or if we want to convince companies not to fight against the use of those tools by competition agencies, which means that we need to talk about procedural fairness and how can we trust that agencies will make a good use of those tools, how to address public choice issues, etc., etc. So what I want to do now is to explore 3 areas where we could think that computational tools will actually help us. The first relates to the detection and analysis of anti-competitive behaviors. What we see here is that already some antitrust agencies are making use of web scraping technique, which is a technique that may allow you to scrape, which is to extract data coming out of digital databases. It could be a website, it could be, a shared databases between companies. And what they do is that they try to detect patterns and to see if indeed we could see that prices will evolve in a similar way between several companies, et cetera, et cetera. But most of the antitrust agencies with whom I'm in touch are actually not fully aware of how you could actually set up such web scraping techniques. And it is actually more complex than what it seems, because most websites will actually change the structure, the underlying structure of their design. And therefore, it might be that if you scrape the prices on a website, it would work for just 1 week, but then the price will actually be displayed in a different manner. And therefore, you need to reset your actual tool. But this is possible. Something else which is possible also is to use natural language processing, which is a machine learning technique allowing you to provide the machine with lots of documents and ask the machine to find the outputs, which is also called unsupervised or deep learning, unsupervised machine learning or deep learning systems. And so here, what you could think is that by indeed providing all the, let's say, public documentations put out there by companies, what you could do is indeed detect competitive infringements or understand the dynamism of the markets. And we know already from the work of a good friend of mine, Nicolas Petit, that by analyzing the 10Ks, those are the financial statements in the United States, financial statements of the companies, you could indeed capture what is the competition, the state of competition between companies. And it seems to me that we could do even more than that should we use NLP to detect practices in the future. But you could also think that it might be a good idea to use the data in the end of the financial agencies and data protection agencies and patent offices, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just an overview, but to be very concrete, there is a great paper in my mind by Bill Kovacic, who argued last year that a thing that we were not doing is to actually look back and try to capture if enforcement activities implemented in the past has proven effective or not. And indeed, I understand why we are not doing that. We are not doing it because, again, antitrust agencies have scarce resources and therefore don't really have the time for all that. And so this is where, by actually training machine learning systems, I think you could actually fix the issue. So in a paper that we published within the Computational Antitrust project, and I will tell you about it in just a few minutes, what 2 researchers have been doing is that they actually took the FTC case law when it comes to the pharma markets and sector, and they labeled those decisions. I've listed here the labeling that they applied to those decisions. And on that basis, they've trained supervised and unsupervised machine learning techniques. And what they ended up finding is that certain practices were actually coming together. And that the same was true in the way the agencies were dealing with the practices and implementing remedies. And that, I believe, is essential information when it comes to understanding what's happening out there on the market. By the way, something, in my view, very interesting is that they've tried to train the same machine learning system using both the FTC and the DOJ. Those are the 2 antitrust agencies in the US case law. But they couldn't actually, because the case law was too different for the machine to understand it. So this is where you see that by using those techniques and tools, you could actually also reach more substantial cohesion when it comes to different competition agencies, if only for the purpose of training those systems. So this is something that all antitrust agencies could do, or at least most of them, if they have a sufficient body of case law, and something that wouldn't be too expensive actually for them to implement. I've asked them about the cost, and they basically said that they spent 6 months doing that, but that the cost were literally zero. You could run such simulation on a regular laptop. Something else that you could be doing, still when it comes to anti-competitive behaviors, is to operationalize and automate the way by which you impose sanctions to companies. In another paper that we published, drafted by expert who worked on the Microsoft case in the United States, what they explain is that when Microsoft was ordered to come up with the doc to allow interoperability for their competitors, Microsoft first assigned the task to 10 of its employees, and eventually ended up with 800 of those employees. And the same was pretty much true for the DOJ. They were overwhelmed, and they realized that it was way more complex than what they thought, although it seems that it would be very easy to just take the documentation that exists within the companies and put it out there, but it wasn't. And so it seems here that using some more computational tools, and it could be, for instance, smart contracts to automate disclosure, you could actually not solve entirely the whole issue, but at least to save time and cost here in the matter. So this is what I wanted to show you when it comes to anti-competitive behaviors. And by the way, I'm putting the QR codes up there so that you can just access to the paper in open access. Now, when it comes to merger control, there are also things that we could be doing. But I must say that here the issue is not the same. Most of the time, we are not facing the issue of detectability. Most companies will notify the merger if they have to. If they don't, this is called a gun jumping, but this is quite rare. But the issue faced by antitrust agencies, and by the way, also by the companies, is that they have to provide information in just a short amount of time, and the agency has 20 or 90 days, depending on if we talk about phase 1 or 2, and it's pretty much the same all over the world, to make a decision. And so this is a challenge, and it means that they must rely on information that is complete and that they can trust. And so when the European Commission sees that the database or that the market shares or any information, as a matter of fact, sent by the company to the Commission wasn't accurate enough or wasn't complete, the European Commission is then imposing fines to those companies. So I've listed here 2 examples that are fairly recent. And faced with that, it seems to me that a solution could be to impose to companies that they will register essential information into private blockchains, meaning that if they ever want to merge or to buy another company, they will be required to give access to the European Commission to this private blockchain. If you are not familiar with it, a blockchain, even though it is private, is immutable, meaning that if the company finds a way to get information out of it just the day before sending the blockchain to the European Commission, or at least access to it, this will appear on the blockchain. And I believe this might be crucial information when it comes to trusting that the company hasn't on purpose decided to take some information out of it. Most of the time, it appears that when the database is not complete, it is solely because of the fact that it is really hard for the companies to come up with complete databases, but we may suspect that here and there it is actually made on purpose. And here I just want to point out that if you were to impose such an obligation on all the companies on the market, or at least let's say the companies of a certain size, right? The big tech companies could do that very easily. And if you were to require access not only to the merging parties, but also to the blockchains of the other parties on the market, then it would be a very efficient way for antitrust agencies to calculate the market shares without having to rely on what the company are providing them with. So This is one thing to be explored when it comes to merge control. Another one is the following. You may have heard about killer acquisitions. The idea being that mainly the big tech companies and also the big pharma companies would be acquiring startups, not for the purpose of fostering competition, but actually quite the opposite, for the purpose of acquiring the tech, the IP rights that they fear, so that they can make sure that those startups will not be able to compete with them. And we do not know if this is a serious problem or not. I could point out to several empirical studies proving the exact opposite in the space. And it seems to me that one reason why we have no idea as to the extent of the problem, if there is such a problem, is because we are not studying the actual technology being acquired. All that we do is that first, we look at the turnovers of the companies. And second, if there is an obligation to notify the merger, then we look at the market shares of those companies. And that's pretty much is all that we do. And it seems to me that by analyzing the actual technology being acquired, you could indeed forecast whether or not this technology has the potential to evolve in a way which might eventually end up competing with a big tech company. So here again, we come back to this idea of evolution and trying to, predict what's happening out there. And we have published a paper by MIT researchers in which they explored this. They called it the fitness of companies, which is the link between the company's growth and the amount of connection that these companies has with all the companies and all the technology. And what they end up showing is that you can actually see a strong correlation between the two, meaning that if, as an agency, you were to actually study this factor, you could forecast whether or not the acquisition is potentially a killer acquisition or just a big tech company acquiring a non-significant competitor out there. So this is the kind of stuff that we may want to explore in the future. Third and final point, competition policies. As I mentioned already, something that we are not doing are retrospectives. If you look at the annual reports of antitrust agencies, most of the time they will just talk about what happened the previous year. They will insist on the amount of fines that they imposed to the companies. When in fact, I think there are potentially more, I wouldn't say efficient, but useful information that it could actually provide us with. Something that the FTC has started to do just a few years ago, which is, for instance, to say that if to calculate the ratio as to when the FTC spent $1, what is the gain for American consumers? And that, I believe, is more relevant information when it comes to measuring the effect of competition policy and trying to understand what has been done in the past. And so this, again, is something that we could automate using computational tools, and I will just show you one in a minute. And that, of course, will eventually lead us to the space of prediction. The idea being that you train the model using past data, so to predict and forecast what may happen. Here, I will be discussing the limits that we have in the space, and I believe those are the greatest limits when it comes to computational law. But just putting that aside for now, I just wanted to show you the following. Here, what you see is a system of agent-based modeling. And so what's happening here is that when you run a computer simulation and you assign certain behaviors to those agents, and basically what you try to study are patterns between the behaviors of those agents. And depending on how they behave, this will change the environment in which they behave, and vice versa. And so here you see that there are, it looks beautiful because they were made in such a way. But what you could see here is that, for instance, if 10 of the agents comes together, then they move to the right or they go to the left. And similarly, it seems to me that you can run similar simulations when it comes to competition law, in which you would say that if the price of a product is going up by a value of, let's say, more than 10 points, then the agents move to the right, which will be that they leave the market because it becomes too expensive for them to stay on the market. And so this idea of agent-based modeling, I think, is a very powerful idea. It could be made in a very simple way, which is the first one that I showed you, is called cellular automata. This here makes use of AI. So you see blue and red agents, and they play a game of hide and seek, and you will play the game over and over again. And at each time you introduce a new round, you will see that they learn from the behaviors of the other agents, which again seems to me could be something that we may want to use to try to see what could be the effect of new policies out there. And of course, the way of doing that will be to train those systems based on past data. And what you could end up with is something similar to that, in which you would see, this is not the case, but let us pretend that this was here trying to see what would be the effect of GDPR on competition, or the AI Act, or the DMA, the DSA, or any other act that you want. And what you could see is that the agents, let's say, stay here to the left, which could be that they are not moving, their market position. Or what you could see is that, well, some of them will actually leave the market if GDPR becomes too burdensome, right? So this is the kind of stuff that you could model should you use those systems, and of course, document those systems with the right data. Last point when it comes to policies is the following. It seems to me that you could use machine learning to draft better policies and better case law. What those researchers have been doing for us is that they've actually trained machine learning system with all the contributions made to the European Commission when it comes to the Digital Markets Act. And what you end up seeing is that depending on the size of the companies, they understand those keywords here, dominant or gatekeeper or monopolistic, monopolization, and newcomers, in a very different way. And they actually assign different feelings to those words. And that, I believe, might be something that you may want to take into consideration when drafting your policy, because it might be that avoiding those terms, which are understood in a totally different manner by the players out there on the field, would be a good idea if you could indeed just use a key term that is understood the exact same way by all the players. So this is something to take into consideration. And the same can actually be said when it comes to court decisions. What you can do is model the evolutions of court decision. And this might be something that might be relevant. So what they've done here in this paper is that, for instance, they've shown that the term market power appears less and less across industries when it comes to antitrust US law cases, which is something which is consistent with the evolution of antitrust law, in which the actual dominant position is now pretty much a given. And we see that agencies and courts find a way to, find that companies are in a dominant position, and they tend to focus more of their expertise and analysis on the actual abuse. And so this would be, of course, relevant information if you are a company and you are getting ready for trial. This could also be relevant information for you as an agency to see if you think this evolution of your case law goes in the right direction or not. What you can also see, and this is what they show in the paper, is that the amount of cases dealing with tying practices is declining. 10 years ago, this used to be the #1 practice when it came to monopolization practices. But now this is actually going through a very strong decline. And so, again, you may think that this, means that we need more enforcement in the space, or you could think that, well, this is potentially that companies are engaging in less of such practices. And so, at the end of the day, I think the story is that if you put more data on the table, then you can decide on the policies and even the politics of what you want to do with the data. And that's perfectly fine. But at least, having the data might be valuable regardless of what you try to achieve with a competition law. So this is the story of what you can do from a very practical point of view. I think eventually we're going to have to discuss whether or not we want to change the substance of antitrust and the way by which we assess antitrust law. I've showed you agent-based modeling, how it looks like, and that was developed in the context of complexity theory, complexity science. And I just wanted to mention that because what you see here in the space is that by using the right tool, this will actually show you something that you were not able to see before using the tool, right? So it is a bit as if we were just using glasses to look at markets in the space of competition law, and that suddenly we give you something which might be similar to a microscope or a telescope, and you see something different, and you see new dynamism and new interactions between different spheres and levels. And that, I believe, will trigger not only the desire, but also the necessity to change the way by which we apply competition law. But if you just give me a few more weeks, I will be putting out something out there which will explain how we could change it. So with all that in mind, I now want to explore when and how should we implement computational antitrust, if indeed 100% of you think that it is a good idea. So what we are doing within the computational antitrust projects at the Codex Center is that we have gathered 55 competition agencies and an academic board of 35 scholars. And we are working with them, publishing papers on a monthly basis. I've just listed here a few of the key figures of what we've been doing this year. This is the first year we've been introducing the project. And here, this is a list of a few of the competition agencies working with us. I just wanted to point out that, yes, Brazil is a part of it and actually very active, for which I'm most grateful. But with that in mind, and you know, with my presentation of it, it wouldn't be complete if I was not to explore what are the potentials, but also the limits of computational antitrust, because this is where, as researchers, I think we have room for more, for improvement and experimentations. So 5 challenges. Challenge number 1, which fields of competition law or antitrust law can we compute? If we talk about predatory pricing, that's very easy to do, right? We have some clear criteria. The legal test is very clear. You could put that in a machine, and then if you have the right facts, you could calculate the outcome. And so in a sense, the dream of Leibniz is here achieved. When it comes to understanding something which is more qualitative, let's say to measure the quality of a product after a software update, this is way more complex. And this is where it might be very hard to compute the outcome of competition law. So a first idea would be to actually, you know, try to see where can we compute, where can we not compute the outcome of competition law. Challenge number 1. But that is just a matter of putting the work and you know, drawing the map of what is possible. Challenge number 2, which is also a challenge for which we can actually provide answers. Which tools are to be developed? And once we are discussing the tools, which is what I've done today, the question becomes who should be developing the tool? And if it comes from a private company, we should discuss whether or not this is problematic, whether or not the private company should retain the right to update the tool. If it is developed by an agency, you may want to discuss whether or not this agency should share the tool with another agency, etc., etc. And of course, talking about the tool is incomplete without talking about what is necessary for the tool to function, which is data. And so the questions becomes, how do you extract the data that you need? And here I just want to make it clear that the data could actually come from within the antitrust agencies, which is what I showed you with the labeling, or it could also come from outside, which is, you know, using the web scraping and all that. And so we do want to keep that in mind and to ensure that the flow of data is actually constant. Challenge number 3, what is the role of computational antitrust? And here I believe we enter a space in which we might actually reach the limits of computational antitrust. George Akerlof, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics, actually wrote a paper last year in which he complained about the fact that if you want to be published in one of the top 5 economic journals, if you want your economic research to have an impact, you need to have a model which often is based on algebra, and you need to be able to prove that the math behind the model is actually strong. and not noisy. And Akerlof is actually complaining that there are important topics that cannot be approached that way, what is something that he called the hard way. And I believe the same is true when it comes to competition law. As I discussed with you for challenge number 1, some of competition law cannot be computed. And I think it will be a mistake to, when comparing computable elements versus non-computable elements, just put aside everything that cannot be computed. If you do that, it means that most of what is related to innovation will actually be thrown away. And of course, this will be a major mistake. Challenge number 4, procedural fairness. If agencies are using computational tools, it should remain possible for companies to understand what has been done by the agency, potentially to access the data. You may also want to discuss access to the learning coefficient or to the model. And here we have some fascinating questions ahead of us. But this is just to talk about what's happening in the case of public enforcement. But of course, we also have issues when it comes to private enforcement, especially if you do have a big company facing competition coming from a small company with no computational power, right? You do not want to always give rights to the company with the most computational power. The same is true when it comes to economic expertise. There are ways to deal with this issue, but something for the lawyers to work upon, I believe. And the final one is actually to know the limits of computational antitrust. Here, I just want to quote Brian Arthur, Schumpeter, and Hayek, because if you read their work and you put it all together, it appears that we are far from the theory of everything. Nassim Taleb has a great book, The Black Swans, in which he actually explains that, you may want to have all the models that you want. There is always a time in which you do have a black swan coming out of the blue and disrupting the entire model, which would have been the case, by the way, 3 years ago, if I was to tell you that we will be having this conference online and not in person. And so perhaps by exploring computational antitrust and thinking about the objective and what we are trying to compute and to achieve, we will actually come to realize that there are lots of things that we cannot compute because we can't understand those things, right? Especially with our human brain limited capacity, which is something that Danny Kahneman is complaining about, arguing in a recent paper that potentially AI will be actually less noisy and more efficient. So it might be that computational tools will create new computational tools. But again, then you come back to the issue of procedural fairness. What do you do if you can't understand at all what's happening behind the computer? So those are a few of the limits. But I do want to conclude on a positive note. First of all, if you are into the theory of everything as much as I am, you may be interested in watching this TV show over here, Devs. It is about a company in the Silicon Valley developing a quantum computer. So quite a fascinating one. But talking about a movie, I just wanted to show you the following one. You may have seen this movie, Groundhog Day, with my dear friend, Bill Murray, although he has no idea I'm his friend, but watching all of his movies, trust me, I am a good friend of him. And so the reason why I'm mentioning the movie is because if you've seen the movie, and here's spoiler alert, please just mute the video for 10 seconds. If you haven't seen the movie, you should. But if you have seen the movie, you know that he's actually stuck in the loop. And he's actually going through the same day over and over again, and he's trying different ways to escape that. And it's actually very unclear, right? Other than finding the great love, how you can actually escape the day in which you're stuck. And I believe that if we are not exploring computational tools, we will be stuck in a Bill Murray fashion throughout, living the same type of analysis and not learning from the case law, and not being able to learn from retrospective studies and what's happening out there on the market. And I believe this is a strong reason why we may want to explore how we can actually augment computational law with those tools so that we understand what are the limits of what we can do and cannot. And so at the very end, all that is a story about matching the substance of what's happening out there on the markets and the complexity, which is increasingly growing, with the methods by which we apply competition law, so that agencies can indeed fight fire with fire, but so also that the companies can better understand what they do, can better comply when they want to comply, and therefore reach a better understanding and agreement with the competition agencies. So this is all that I wanted to mention. Again, if you are watching this video 20 years from now, thank you very much. We are in 2021, and I hope to be able to say that we are organizing the 21st edition of the Computational Antitrust Conference. But starting small, we are this year organizing the very first Computational Antitrust Conference. This is not yet public information, but what the heck. So please feel free to join us. All the agencies and the board and this year's author will be part of it. And so we will be discussing some more of the limits, but also the potential of computational antitrust. This is all that I wanted to tell you. All of our papers are accessible in open access. If you go to computationalantitrust.com, you can also email me or tweet things. And I'm more than happy to engage in a further discussion. Bruno, I believe you may have some questions, but in the meantime, thank you so very much for having me and the opportunity to explore computational antitrust with you.
Thank you, Thibault. This is a lot of food for thought. Yeah. So interesting. I have quite a few questions, if you don't mind. The first one, you said that there are over 55 antitrust agencies. They are already the project, and it's a new project. It just started in January 2021. But is there any computational tools that the antitrust agencies they have already successfully engaged in?
Yes, so there are a few. I'm aware of the UK being pretty active in the space, but I'm not sure what I can or cannot tell you. I'm aware of the FTC being active in the space, and this is public information. They have a tool called Relativity. And what they do is that they are able, by using NLP techniques, to provide the machine with lots of documents, especially when it comes to auctions and public tenders. And what they are able to detect are potential collusions, although, of course, the keyword collusion or agreement it does not appear in those documents. I believe that some other agencies in Latin America may be well advanced also. And so all that to tell you that we've been asking all of the antitrust agencies part of the project to send us a 1 or 2 page summary of all of the implementations of computational tools they've been doing during the year. And all that will be combined and put out there on our website, open access. So we'll see. I'm very curious to see. I know that there are lots of ongoing uses of computational tools that I'm not even aware of. So I'm looking forward to this report as much as you are, I suspect. But I've tried my best in the very first paper, in which I explored what is computational antitrust, to summarize and to put, at least in the footnotes, all of the actual uses of computational tools by agencies.
That's great. And you're saying about fight fire with fire, and you're also talking about the evolution of antitrust and the evolution of computational itself. In the evolution, we have a concept of the evolutionary arms race. That is the struggle between competing species, and that they may develop a specific trait just to fight with the predator or the prey itself. So how could a computational antitrust foresee and respond to that, to uncompetitive practices that they take already those computational tools used by the agencies and try to fight against it?
Yeah. So, there is a saying that this is a $1 million question. And we're thinking, well, potentially it is actually more a 1 billion, if not 10 or $100 billion question, because most of the people have been complaining that computational is too static. But as I said, we don't have the right tools to actually make it more dynamic and to indeed capture what you've been explaining, right? Competition between varieties of the same species, and then competition between the species themselves. And so this is, again, I think we are not ready to answer the question, but this should be the number one question that we should all be seeking to answer in the space. And again, since the video will be on YouTube and will stay there for quite some time, I suppose, we are working with on the paper with Nicolas Petit, and our objective is not to answer the question. I mean, that is the objective, but we know already that we will never reach this objective, at least not in the coming years. But we are trying our best to explore how we could do that, and I believe that it will eventually lead us to first understand what are the different components of competition, and to leave, the obsession we have with markets, and to look at what's happening within the actual firm. And there you may want to study the technical dynamic capability, which is the capability of a firm to evolve. You may also want to study the role of the managers. And you may also want to study what's happening at the industry level, right? So to be 2021 related, you may want to study, why is Facebook introducing the metaverse? Is it because there are too many regulations in the space for social media? What's possible in terms of the technology behind? And so making sure that we have all of those, at least 3 levels in mind, and try to capture what is the dynamic between the level is, I think, the most essential thing. And it will probably lead us to rethink the way by which we apply competition law, because it means that the ability to freeze the interaction between those levels is actually the worst type of practice that you may encounter, which means that you may want to define market power by the ability to freeze the markets. And so this is, something which is vast. And I'm sorry that I can't be more specific right now, because I do not know the answer to the question. And yet, I, again, believe this is the most important question we are facing.
Great.
But you are writing a PhD, right, on the subject. So waiting for you to put it out there.
Yeah, but it's not about that. It's about the contract of sale evolution. It's a bit different. Yeah.
Indeed. But this could be helpful. And what you see in that space of complexity science is that it is being used in biology, musicology, physics, archaeology, lots of different types of social sciences, including economic theory and so on. And so I'm fascinated to try to learn from what's happening in the other space, in the other fields in which they apply complexity theory, to see how this could inform competition law. And your PhD will be part of it, for sure.
Oh, great. It's good to know. And yeah, and you just said about the limits of the computational antitrust. And I'm thinking about the monopoly test, that they usually, it's a small but no transitive increase of price. Yeah, and it's those markets that they are not really price involved, that we're probably, it's the tension, there is the coin there. Can computational, although you said there are some limits, can computational also help in this change? For example, instead of using price, using other ways of measuring the monopoly?
Sure. So I think this is, one of the core challenges for computational antitrust. If you are working with prices, of course, it's really, it's not really easy, but I can see how you can measure what's happening in dynamics. If you talk about innovation or non-price related features, it's more complex, but it's possible. If you talk about attention, indeed, you could say that there is, a market for attention, and that is something that you can measure. And actually, we have the data. Facebook in the annual report is actually putting the data out there, and they are actually showing, and they are not very proud of that, but that the number of users is growing, but that each user spend way less time on their platforms than what they used to. And so potentially, if you, again, model all that and try to understand what is the complexity of the ecosystem, you could see that attention is shifting from one social media to another, or to one social media to something which is not a social media, let's say a metaverse or whatever that is. And so indeed, I believe that those are complex issue, complex not in the sense of complicated, but complex in the sense of there are lots of interconnections between different types of tech and firms and industries. And this is the kind of things that escapes the human brain. I'm reading, on a yearly basis, The Pretense of Knowledge by Hayek, and he's actually exploring this idea that complexity is nearly impossible to capture with our human brain. And this is where I think that computational tools could help us and assist us in trying to capture all that, and to capture what is dynamism when it comes to attention market and all the types of features, and to try to measure the privacy of general terms and conditions. This is already something that you could do using computational tools. So there is a great potential out there, and not only for the old, Chicago way of applying computational law.
It's awesome. I just have one last question. I know that we are past the time that we're supposed to have, and then I will give the floor to Tariq. He says he has a question, and I just want to know how our companies, they are responding to the project itself.
So a few companies got in touch with us. This was clear from the outset that we will never take private money, or as a matter of fact, public money. So none of the antitrust agencies are financing us. None of the companies will be financing us because we want our academic freedom. And so I've seen interest in the space, including by some of the companies who are the subject of most of the antitrust attention those days, also by the companies involved in legal analytics. But I can say that for the most part, we are engaging with antitrust agencies. And there I was very surprised and pleased to see that the vast majority of the antitrust agencies we got in touch with said yes immediately to join the project, and are sending us questions every time we publish a paper. I am putting agencies in touch, and so trying to play the role of a platform a bit, although this is decentralized and totally horizontal, and we have nothing to gain except for a new and better competition law, hopefully, if only at the margin.
Yeah, that's all of your academics are looking for. We just want to improve a bit of the world,
just a tiny bit.
Yeah, if we can. So Tariq, if you have a question, please ask it.
Thanks. Well, I have more than a question. I have a fear, I could say. How can I say? I was thinking about the second challenge to computational antitrust. In fact, I'm pretty much sold into general idea of using these tools to improve competition. But I have a fear, especially thinking about the Brazil and poor country cases. We lack people to do this stuff. We have some, for example, I know Brazil Competition Authority have already some instruments to using some of these computational instruments, especially artificial intelligence, I know. But still we have a lot of problems, shortage of people, shortage of institutional stability sometimes, which is way bigger here in poor countries than more than developed countries. So I have this fear in these tools. They'll be poorly implemented here, and they will be more used like how can I say, more like we're just doing that at the north. It will be more like how can I say, just
a facade. It's not a real thing.
Yeah, exactly. Just to see, we're using that. We didn't see the problem. We didn't see, for example, there's no competition issue here, so it's okay. So I fear that a little bit here in Brazil. In the general idea, I love it. I'm strong supporter. That's my research, but I think not only to competition but to the administrative state as a whole. But the real application, especially in a poor country like Brazil, I fear a little bit.
So, quite a few things. First, you obviously know Brazil's way better than I do. So, I think it's very interesting to hear your perspective on it and the fear that you may have, and that's something I need to reflect upon. The things that springs to mind is that if indeed I'm right in saying that reactive methods will decline as they do, and that it will become increasingly complex for them to detect proactively anti-competitive practices, I think they will eventually face the issue of trying to justify their budgets. If only that. If you can't sanction any anti-competitive practice, how can you justify an agency of, I don't know how many agents CADI had, but I guess quite a few, several hundreds, right? And I don't know what's the budget, but I'm sure the government would be very happy to cut down on their budget. So, going back to the evolutionary theory, and I think the issue of survival, it might be necessary for those agencies to use those tools in a way which is very effective and not just a facade if they want to survive, but maybe not. The thing that I want to show you is that I agree with you that we have a issue when it comes to actually attracting computer scientists, and especially good computer scientists, to work for those agencies. And actually, I just wanted to show you that. I've recently was interviewed by the World Economic Forum. This was published last week. And this is exactly what I say. I mean, eventually, we're going to face the issue of the incentive. I understand that if you are a computer scientist and you receive an offer from Google, this might be more tempting because you're going to make 10 times what you will do if you work for an antitrust agency. So you're going to have to talk about money, right? And some of course, will be tempted by the experience of working for the government and increasing the common good. But I think this is not good enough to attract, more than just a few computer scientists. And so I'm sorry to say that we have to talk about the money and what's available out there. And if we don't, then we're going to face trouble. But going back to the fear, it seems that the UK had the same one when they left the Eurozone, because they realized that they would get more enforcement and they got scared. And they thought, well, we can't deal with all that. And this was a way for them to implement those tools. And so hopefully the exact opposite, which is that they fear not having any cases, will lead to the same result, which is more adoption. And I have to say that Brazil is, again, very active. And so I will be more worried when it comes to all the smaller countries in Latin America. But I will reflect upon it and probably come back to you because those even political or sociological matters are key when it comes to the adoption of those tools. And this is not just a technical matter or a legal matter. So thank you very much for pointing out to this problem.
Yeah, I think Brazil is in a better position in somewhat smaller countries. I agree with you. Some of Brazilian institutions are very strong, and CADI, which is Antitrust Authority, is one of them.
Yeah.
But I was thinking because I have a friend who's a journalist. He was talking about journalists based on data and how usually fails here in Brazil, because they create these teams. They're good teams. They start to produce good stuff in the journalist area, but as soon as they consolidate, they disappear because banks start to hire them, and other more profitable enterprises start to hire them because there's a shortage of people who have these skills. The shortage there is even in developed countries, but here is far more problematic. So I was thinking about that.
But it could be that there are two different things to be differentiated here. The first is to design the tools. And there you could see strong cooperation between agencies, right? And I'm aware that a few agencies are now trying to explain to the others how to use this, and they give them the software. and access to the API and the database. But indeed, then eventually you need someone to feed the tools and to run them. And this is where you do need someone who understands what's the culture in the country, how the agency is functioning. And so again, if you don't put the money on the table, then you will face the issue that you are saying. However, if you put the money on the table, it might be that ex-Google will eventually go and work for the agency, right? This is a possible future. So it all comes down to money, I suppose.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation. It was really good.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Tariq. And so due to the time and all the technical issues that we have, I think we can just end here. I would like to thank you so much. That was an incredible presentation. Congratulations for the project. And I hope to see the conference. It will be streamed online. I hope I can just watch it. And thank you so much, Thibault, for being here.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. Good luck with the following speakers. Quite fantastic speakers, I must say. So I'm not too worried about that. And see you very soon.
Thank you. See you.